Following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, I considered shelving this reflection and recording something else. But then, hearing about his faith, a faith that he shared with Her Majesty the Queen, I decided that following on from Easter, with the theme, of course, of death and resurrection to new beginnings, it seemed entirely appropriate to just record my reflection as it stood. It's a substantial reflection, and I commend it to you. Last week I ended my sermon at St Mary's Church, in which I spoke about Mary Magdalene discovering a new relationship with Jesus after she encountered him in the garden after his resurrection, by suggesting that we can all find new relationships with Jesus. We need to discover what he wants of us and of the church from here on. To develop this theme this week, I'm taking the unusual step of presenting this sermon or reflection as a live talk in person at St Michael's Church, as a recorded online reflection, and as a hard copy text which can be printed and given to anyone who regards himself as church family. I feel driven to do this because over the last few weeks the same common theme seems to have cropped up in different meetings I've been to and in other contexts. Those to whom I've mentioned it, the PCC for example, say that it's resonated for them too. So I think we need to listen, because maybe God is speaking directly to us here. The theme is quite simply sitting in the boat quietly with Jesus after the storm. I'll expand as I go. As I said, I've been reflecting for a few weeks on this, and I've been reminded of the number of times that Jesus, when instead of rushing to a situation, he did exactly the opposite. He and his disciples paused for a little while to consider what had happened, to decide how best to respond, and in the most timely way. You may like to have a Bible to hand and look up the Bible passages and maybe dwell with them for a while by yourself. One advantage, of course, of the recording is you can always pause the recording and look at the Bible passages then, or perhaps afterwards. It's a good advantage of technology. There is, of course, the story of Jairus' daughter in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. Jesus stops on his way to the sick girl to heal a woman who was bleeding. He spends time in the midst of all that was going on, effectively quiet and alone with the woman in the middle of the melee around. It meant that the woman's needs were met, but then the girl died. It was because the girl died that Jesus' power and authority were even more revealed. Then, of course, this brings to mind Lazarus in John chapter 11, when Jesus waited 2 whole days before going to see the family and raise Lazarus up. 2 days he waited. Practically speaking, this may again have been to make sure that Lazarus was known to be really dead, so that Jesus' power over death could be revealed. But also, I've heard it said, so that Jesus could avoid any infection from which Lazarus may have died. The point here is that Jesus didn't rush to be at the bedside of a sick friend. It seems to me that Jesus never rushed anywhere. But let's go a bit deeper with the lectionary gospel reading set for this Sunday, and which we will read at church. It's what you might expect the Sunday after Easter, John chapter 20 verses 19 to the end of the chapter. It gives us a picture of what happened in the immediate aftermath of the resurrection. We're taken to a locked room where Jesus reveals himself to his followers. Thomas is able to express his doubts about the situation they're in. It takes guts to stick your neck out when everyone around you is making assumptions and just going with the crowd. They've gone through a terrible situation together. It's been frightening. It involved all kinds of unknowns, anxieties, a lack of hope maybe, isolation, exclusion, even death and darkness. Sounds familiar to us. In all the various Easter Day accounts, there was an initial rush to tell close friends. But then their reaction was to sit together in a room, take stock and to share their thoughts, possibly for several weeks it seems. A couple walked quietly off to Emmaus, chatting as they went, lamenting and reflecting. You'll find that story in Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. Jesus' friends had gone through a nightmare if ever I saw one, but they didn't just resume their normal everyday activities until later. They went back to fishing eventually, probably out of necessity. The first thing they did here was to take themselves off and keep themselves safe. They simply sat together. I suspect they prayed and talked a lot. They paused, and of course then they met with Jesus, reflected with him, and then moved on, and life was never the same again. In fact, as far as I can see, the disciples did no significant recorded ministry until after the Holy Spirit came at Pentecost. And then it was a very different ministry to the way it was when Jesus was with them. Things became very, very different. The world had changed completely. The other main story, the one that really triggered this reflection for me, is Jesus calming the storm. You'll find it in Matthew chapter 8, 23 to 27, in Mark chapter 4, 35 to 41, and in Luke chapter 8, 22 to 25. I'm going to read it to you from Matthew's Gospel now. It says, "And when Jesus got into the boat, his disciples followed him. A gale arose on the lake, so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him up, saying, 'Lord, save us, we are perishing.' And he said to them, 'Why are you afraid, you of little faith?' Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was dead calm. They were amazed, saying, 'What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?'" What struck me about this was that the disciples and Jesus had been having a really hard time in their work. Crowds of people had been following them around, maybe sometimes for the wrong motive. Just look at the preceding chapters. It's been frantic, so much going on, and they were exhausted. And then on top of that, they set out in the boat to try to get some peace, and they got hit by a violent, probably life-threatening storm. They were fishermen, used to bad weather for goodness sake, but this scared them. Know the feeling? But Jesus calms the storm and all their fears, and there was, it said, a dead calm. And then they were amazed. The image I have is that now there is a pause as the disciples sit in the boat in the middle of the lake and take stock of what has happened to them. If you read it, you can't but stop reading there for a second, just before they make their way to the shore. There is a period of dead calm. Even when they get to the shore, Jesus gently ministers to some individuals. The pace all calms down. I love this image. Sitting in the boat quietly with Jesus and his close followers and friends. Hold it in your mind. It's where I'm at now. I've had very little time to pause this last year. It's been pretty full on. And I'd like to sit quietly in the boat for a while. So let's sit together quietly in the boat with Jesus. For me personally, mentally I am very anxious about returning to social and church life as it was. I am, despite appearances, a sensitive introvert. I find meetings and large public occasions taxing at the best of times. Some of you understand how I find entering a room full of people, even people I know, especially when I'm not sure what is expected of me as a vicar, very difficult. I will need time over the next few months to gather my energy to face the world in person, and then also time after each new event to recover. Remember please that Chris and I have not yet completed a normal year in the parish here. So much is still new. And I can only do so much before I need to retreat and take time out on my own. And I'm already finding this coming period daunting, even before it starts. I know that I'm not alone and that some of you relate to this, probably at least 40% of you. Please let's be gentle with everyone and very aware of people's mental well-being, not driving everything at a pace back to how it was. Give folk space. From a physical point of view, there is also the government roadmap and the scientists' advice. Although many of us in this community have been vaccinated, the vaccine is not a miraculous cure-all. Many members of our families have not been able to get the jab yet. Possibly it's a bit like the Lazarus situation, infection is still out there. We must not rush back to normal, or we will jeopardise not only our health, but that of others whom we love and for whom we care. And then from a church perspective, each Easter teaches us things have to die to bring about resurrection. It's what Jesus said, a seed has to die in the ground before it grows into a new life, to change and give us fresh growth. The Bible apart, our gardens should teach us that each year. If we just leave things as they are, then the plants become crowded and less healthy. The garden gets kind of wild. Plants need pruning, tidying, clearing up, but all in a timely and sensitive way. Sometimes plants do need to be brutally dug up and discarded for the sake of the whole. A plant that is no longer growing and seems to have no flowers or fruit, we take out. It's an inefficient use of energy, time, space and money to keep on tending it. Now the church, as we know, has been notoriously slow to change over the years, for decades and centuries. Tradition has smothered creativity, and the church had ceased to grow. The message is obvious. None of us should make assumptions that all will be as it was. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today and forever, but it doesn't mean to say he doesn't change. It means that he is relevant to every age. The same is true of the church, or at least it should be. This period is a gift, a great opportunity, a blank canvas. There is a chance to change. In fact, things should not be the same, because if they are, we've learnt nothing. But of course we need to manage change sensitively. Change is never easy. There will be much sadness at the loss of things that people hold dear or have held dear, things that may not emerge from the ashes as we focus our energy on new mission. We must allow space and time for people to lament this loss and to understand how they feel if what they love is not part of the new world. So talking about love, let's move forward into a future with large doses of love. And of course here 1 Corinthians 13 comes to mind. I paraphrase. Love is selfless. Love does not demand what it wants, and it looks outwards to others' needs. Love does not bear grudges or grumble. It is forgiving and forbearing. Love is generous to the point of being totally self-giving, as Jesus was. Our future plans for worship, mission and church activities should be underpinned by the principle of love and not by our personal preferences. But of course that passage from St. Paul starts, love is patient. And here we return to the motif of waiting until the time is right, until God's time is right. This brings my reflection back to those moments after the storm, patiently sitting in the boat with Jesus, enjoying his company in the stillness after the storm of the last year or so, recognizing Jesus afresh for what he is. Remember, the disciples were astonished and amazed. They were filled with awe. It was a new relationship with our Lord, and not the same as when they set off. And as an aside, we must not forget in our excitement to manage our own energy levels, our health and well-being. We are all a little older than we were at the beginning of the pandemic, and maybe a little bit more tired. Believe me, sitting in the boat is not procrastination. I know that some of you think I delay in doing things, and maybe I do sometimes. But it's my experience that if we pause for a moment and gaze with awe on Jesus, then we see through the glass darkly, and better solutions to our problems often do become clear. I've sometimes learnt that to my cost over the years, that rushing doesn't solve anything. So how long do we pause for? Who knows for sure? This is not the place to talk about practical plans, but I do ask that we make significant time and space. Pray with me, talk with me, share with me and with each other your lament at loss and your sadness, but your hopes for the future. Join me, join others, join the church in the boat with Jesus and his friends, as we paddle quietly and gently towards the shore, looking for a new take on life together as the church. Thank you.